Well, here's the big news, Rob. Did you hear? Trump is ending all of the wars. He's ending the U.S. empire.
I did hear that.
That's huge, dude.
Or according to some supposed leftist anti-imperialists, he's withdrawing the empire around the edges. So I've seen people saying that, like I'm not gonna be dumb enough to actually make a statement saying he's withdrawing the empire, but I will act like he's withdrawing it around the edges. Something that
What does that mean?
Obama never did.
Well, what does that mean, around the edges?
I don't know, because the edges just keep growing every day. All presidents, to some degree, have increased the empire,
right,
and then pulled back maybe some aspects around the edges when they lose a war I'm not sure why people are saying that. But what is interesting is people really believe his rhetoric still.
We're doing a big Empire Files series, not just report, a series on how Trump is expanding the empire in literally every single region of the world, including Iraq, including Syria, and including Afghanistan. And I'm going to talk about why. But when you see these numbers and when you see the actual facts, that narrative becomes really fucking stupid. And it just means that people haven't done their research or even have tried to do their research, which alarms me. Because in this media climate, you need to do research and you need to think about what you're putting out there.
Yes.
And you really need to do your research about what is actually going on in terms of the expansion of the military and what Trump is doing behind the scenes.
Especially let's just say real quick, especially the cherry picking that people do of his supposed anti-interventionist rhetoric.
Right.
It's like if you look at that all in a vacuum and cherry pick it, it's compelling. I will acknowledge that that even during the campaign, I was very intrigued by it.
Right.
I mean, I think a lot of people on the left were. And that's understandable because it was a wild card. We didn't know what we were going to get. But we've had 2 years now.
Right.
And the only thing we got is him just acting like he's going to withdraw the troops when he's like in the middle, embroiled in like several potentially impeachable scandals. He hasn't been building up to this. He hasn't been saying, I'm going to withdraw the troops. It's just like he's been like wild card about it the whole time. But much worse is what you're going to go into about how he's actually expanded it.
Right. So this is a huge misnomer in itself to say Trump is, quote, withdrawing the troops, because the troops that he is, quote unquote, withdrawing are troops that he himself added. He himself added the troops that he is withdrawing.
Yeah.
It's very, very important to understand that. Yeah, well, I was going to say, before we get into the Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq part, I wanted to say that at first glance, this does seem to play into that narrative, that Trump is, an anti-interventionist. And the thing is that liberal media, of course, corporate media outlets and Hillary Clinton herself are playing into that too. They're saying Trump's isolationism is dangerous. This is making America way more dangerous. So it's just emboldening his camp and that false narrative, which is super disturbing, not
Trump
surprising, but
versus deep
disturbing.
state.
Exactly. Not only has the media been pushing Trump from the right yet again when it comes to war and foreign policy, mainly Democrats, who still are pretending that we're like in Syria to protect human rights or something. It's just fucking laughable. They're like, we can't withdraw now.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? What do you think this is? The U.S. official policy is to overthrow Assad. U.S. official policy in Afghanistan is to destroy the Taliban and for regime change there. Like, what do you think this is? But not only that, they're praising Mattis as the adult in the room. And I wanted to quickly debunk that because he's a war criminal. And how hilarious is it for liberals and stuff to be like, Mattis was the only sane one. Really? He's so fucking sadistic. Not only did he gleefully say how much he enjoys shooting people, he says it's a hoot to kill people. He said he has a plan to kill everyone he meets. That's like how fucking militaristic his brain is from being a general for so long. He's ordered several massacres. He was the architect of the Fallujah annihilation that killed thousands and thousands of people.
Which was, if we remember correctly, was revenge for the four Blackwater guys getting strung up.
And the legacy of the U.S. military in Fallujah is worse than Hiroshima.
Oh, yeah, I believe it.
So that's Mattis's real legacy.
Yeah.
He also ordered the bombing of a wedding party in an Iraqi village in 2004. And then when he had basically a kill everything that moves rules of engagement order. And when he was asked about it, because he covered up the Marines that committed all these massacres and made sure they walked away unscathed. And when reporters asked him about it, he said, I don't have to apologize for anything my troops do. I don't have to apologize for the conduct of my men. So he's out, right? He's resigned out of horror that Trump has withdrawn the troops. He's replaced with, what do you know, a Boeing executive, Patrick Shanahan, who replaced him as acting defense secretary. This is a guy who worked at Boeing for 32 years as his VP. So, again, removing the veneer, removing the mask, removing that kind of semblance of like space between, 1 degree of separation between the defense contractors and literally running the Pentagon. So that's very disturbing. But also, like, can we stop fucking the pretenses here about what U.S. foreign policy is about now that Boeing is in charge?
Yeah, Boeing is, I think, either the number 1 or 2 military defense contractor in the world. Boeing is one of the only military defense companies that makes a lot of other stuff too. So people don't realize that they are like the number 2. I mean, they made a lot of airplane engines, a lot of airplanes. But yeah, defense contracting is their number 1 thing. Yeah, that's another example of him taking the mask off. So it is a very strange thing that while he announces this is like the end of these wars, he would hire someone like that. Everybody's not like, wow, that's so bizarre that Trump would think we could believe that he's going to end the wars while hiring the guy from Boeing. Like that's crazy that he's dumb enough to think we're going to fall for this. Instead, a bunch of people on the left didn't even mention that. I mean, I saw Greenwald, I saw dozens of people on the left who should know better not even mention that at all. And then like just lawyerly wiggling their way out of all the arguments. And like I saw like Jeffrey St. Clair from Counterpunch going after Greenwald and other people saying like, you really think Trump is doing this? Like what? Like how could you think that? Because of this, and this. Just buying into any of Trump's rhetoric is a bad idea in general. Again, there are only 2,000 total troops there.
Right.
There's still a bunch of aircraft carriers, airstrikes, planes being flown over the country constantly. Trump didn't say those are going to be removed. But is that what he's really saying? Like, or is he just talking about ground troops? See, this is all very unclear. Where is the actual policy on paper of what he's going to do?
Well, first of all, I didn't even know that there were troops in Syria because there weren't during Obama's term. He just had a couple advisors on the ground.
So I thought it was something like 200.
Yeah, so 200.
Yeah. So
less
it was like
than 300 troops, let's just say.
Yeah, so Obama did put troops in Syria after he promised he wasn't going to, but it was a very small amount, and Trump literally increased it by 10 times.
Yeah, he increased it 10 times. But like you said, Robbie, the U.S. was already occupying 30% of Syria. On top of that, Israel has increased its bombing campaigns throughout Trump's tenure. Israel barely bombed Syria during Obama's tenure. We already know the history between Israel and the Obama administration. You're telling me that Israel is bombing Assad's forces without coordinating with Trump? So right after announcing this quote-unquote withdrawal, Israel bombs Assad's forces on Christmas.
Yeah.
That is not happening without a green light from the U.S., so get that out of the way. There's been a huge, massive increase in bombing and civilian casualties in Syria, not to mention the fact that Trump was actually the first person to directly bomb Assad from Mar-a-Lago over chocolate cake, very flippantly, which could have caused fucking World War III. But aside from that, just the air raids and bombing that Trump has been doing. In 2017, the number of U.S.-led airstrikes in Iraq and Syria increased by 50%. Increased by 50%. And Trump told us during the campaign trail, he said he's going to change the rules of engagement. He's going to bomb the shit out of ISIS, essentially just saying he's going to carpet bomb neighborhoods. He did not care about civilian casualties, and that's been crystal clear with the amount of casualties that has happened under Trump. So in Syria alone, bombing increased 50%, civilian casualties increased 250% there. 250%, Robbie. That's how many people died under Trump. And we're just talking about Syria right now. As I mentioned before, this is happening in every region of the world. But I'm focusing on Syria, obviously, because when you compare the withdrawal of troops that you added and add on top of that a massive amount of bombing and civilian casualties, I mean, is there anything praiseworthy about that at all?
No. I mean, there shouldn't be from anybody, especially people on the left who are anti-imperialist. But one of the problems I see is that somehow this idea of bombing ISIS, being over there to bomb ISIS and to get rid of ISIS, is passively accepted on the anti-imperialist left. And I find that very strange because I just assumed that it didn't matter what the group was or how heinous they were or whatever, that there would always be like a contingent of like the anti-war world or the anti-imperialist left that would always oppose all forms of U.S. military intervention, bombing, whatever. But when we reach this weird tipping point where after ISIS started releasing these horrifying videos, I really feel like even people on the left, anti-imperialist, dehumanize ISIS to like not just ISIS, but like the people who fight among them. They look at them almost like animals, and somehow they've accepted that they're just going to be endlessly bombed. Like that's okay now somehow, which I find very odd. But I think that Trump has seized on that, and that's also why these increase in civilian casualties is not a big deal. Is not as big a deal to people as it should be. Because if these 250 civilian casualties, 250% increase was done trying to take out Assad's army, then people would be outraged from the same group of people that I'm talking about. But since it's bombing ISIS, it's like not even a concern. And I just find that odd. I mean, yeah, overthrowing Assad would be a terrible idea. It would be like an imperial plan that's been long in the works, and we shouldn't do that. But why bombing ISIS is okay?
But it's also just the rhetoric of bombing ISIS. I mean, how do we know what the hell's going on? We already know that there was a lot of kind of Air Force cover for ISIS affiliates on the ground in Syria.
And that's something that I think gets lost in this larger Syrian argument. All we hear about is every fighter is Al-Qaeda. There's all these weird, distorted talking points out there, but that is one real one that's really bad that gets completely lost in the shuffle. The Obama administration was even doing this too. And it's obvious. Think about it just from not even geostrategic, but just regionally. The more territory ISIS takes over, the better it is for our regime change plans against Assad, because the more ground he loses with his forces. So it's just strange to me that argument wasn't presented more. On some level, we're enabling and allowing ISIS to take over more territory.
And also just the relationship with Saudi Arabia. Hillary Clinton on these WikiLeaks cables saying that she knows that Wahhabism is the most direct cause of the ideology. It is really sad in the vacuum, of course, caused by U.S. foreign policy. But I just don't even take the rhetoric at face value, because just like the war on terror, we know that the Afghanistan war wasn't because of freedom. We know that Syria is not because of democracy. And we know that they're not bombing to eradicate ISIS or free anyone. Obviously, don't take things at face value of what they're saying at press conferences. Like, you should probably ask more questions about what is going on behind the scenes.
Of course. And I think we really lost an opportunity, or I mean, it's gone several years now, where people on the left actually use the word terrorists, to describe the people, whether you think ISIS is like the most disgusting, fascist organization on the planet. It's just, to me, it's just strange to hear anybody calling, from the left, anti-imperialist world saying that word.
Well, it's the dehumanization, like you said. Robbie, when the AUMF, the authorization for use of military force after 9/11, of course, we know Barbara Lee was the only one who opposed it. And what did that do? That kind of charted a new era of warfare and bombing. That was an endless war. You can wage it anywhere in the world under the guise of fighting Al-Qaeda and its affiliates. And that is morphed now into something that's just all-consuming and all-encroaching. I mean, it's really happening everywhere. It's never ending. The wars go on and on. But at that time, people were outraged. They were outraged about the initiation of the war on terror. They were outraged about bombing 7 countries under Obama. So I guess my question is, how did we go from being outraged about the extrajudicial assassinations, the drone strikes, the war on terror as a premise, to now kind of accepting that, well, we got to do something about ISIS? Because ISIS are now worse than the Nazis were. So now we have to fucking get rid of ISIS. Yeah. They're terrorists, they're head choppers, and kind of this weird support of like Russia bombing ISIS. But it's like Russia is actually threatened by ISIS. That's their border. But for some reason, the whole like admonishing the U.S. for just relentlessly bombing Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq under the guise of bombing ISIS just kind of falls by the wayside. And I don't understand when that shift happened.
I'm really struggle with this, honestly, because I cannot relate to a lot of the discussions about Syria, because I feel like a lot of people buy into these strange tropes that I just thought from the Bush era were like complete propaganda, So to hear people saying them now, I'm just completely baffled by it.
And also, bombing breeds terrorism. Isn't that like the most basic, fundamental thing that we can all agree on?
Yeah. Yeah. It shouldn't matter who the target is.
Right.
It's like just indiscriminate bombing for this long.
In Afghanistan, when Trump dropped the Moab, the mother of all bombs, first of all, that's a direct affront on Muslims, the mother of all cities, Mecca. And naming this bomb the mother of all bombs is sick in itself. But also when he dropped that bomb on Afghanistan on alleged ISIS caves, we were all kind of perplexed. Like, when did ISIS come into Afghanistan? And then there was just no follow-up about how many casualties were there. This is a bomb blast with a mile radius.
Yeah.
And Mattis, at the time, this fucking war criminal psychopath, said, that's a horrible use of our troops' time to dig through tunnels to count bodies. So we have no idea how many people actually died. But that was barely discussed or followed up with because, again, the talking point was, well, we dropped them on ISIS caves. Moving on now, next chapter.
Totally
It was so fucking weird. It's like, what are you talking about?
Mm-hmm. I just don't get how this is so oversimplified.
Yeah, it's like the oversimplification of Hamas in Gaza.
Exactly.
Like everyone's Hamas. And it's like you work in the government, you're Hamas. I mean, everyone's a Hamas target because they just live in Gaza.
Uh-huh.
The same thing with ISIS. Whatever territories ISIS takes over, if you're a fucking civilian, watch out because the U.S. will bomb the shit out of you if you just live in the vicinity of someone in ISIS.
Lots of people on the left were celebrating this apparent withdrawal in ways that, and just going back to us, like you and I were completely skeptical of this proposal that Obama was going to end the Iraq war. We didn't believe it. Even when he pulled out troops, we didn't like praise it. Like we were super skeptical about everything like the whole time. So to have all these people now acting so excited when they were skeptical of Obama's proposals too, it's just very odd.
Well, and
I
also,
don't get it.
How come the framework isn't, wow, it's crazy that Trump added all these troops? I mean, it's good that he's taking them out, but what the fuck? Like, how come we didn't talk about the fact that he added all of these troops? No one's talking about that. It's almost like that was already like accepted, like, oh, well, these troops were there. No, they weren't there already.
It's an oversimplified narrative. Those people you're talking about who don't talk about Trump adding troops will talk about how Obama added troops. They won't talk about the ways that Trump increased it. They'll just talk about how he inherited it. And that's odd to me. I don't know if they're being disingenuous on purpose or if they've actually bought into Trump's rhetoric. Or they're so reacting so much to the way that the resistance and the media is going against Trump that I don't get it.
And this could mean multiple things. This could mean that the U.S. is going to increase its aerial bombardment. It could mean that it's going to relinquish some of the control to Israel to up its aerial bombardment. It could mean, as we know, Trump had a conversation with Erdogan recently before this announcement. It could mean that he's simply giving a green light to Erdogan to further encroach into Syria. So there's several components that we need to explore theoretically once this unfolds. That's why I'm just like urging caution for people to just see what happens. But yeah, a lot could be afoot here with the Syria stuff specifically.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the first things I thought was, people like John Bolton, even Pompeo, and other hawks that surround Trump have long suggested that actually overthrowing Assad in Syria as part of this sort of larger, U.S. imperialistic plan to, convert the Middle East into all of our puppet states. The idea of overthrowing Assad is actually not a useful one because, these neocons have long believed that Assad is completely propped up by Iran. And they've even used this phrase that if they cut off the head of the snake, which is overthrowing or changing the regime in Iran to a pro-U.S. puppet regime, then Assad will fall as a result. Bolton is one of the main people, and he's an outlier from a lot of the rest of the neocons because he hasn't really pushed the idea of overthrowing Assad specifically. He has, however, said that he thinks Assad will fall if the Iranian government falls. So he's looking at it like that. So this could be some kind of long con. I mean, if it was thought out, and, this idea, like Rand Paul is like, oh my God, I wish I was in the room to see John Bolton's face when Trump said he was going to pull out the troops. I mean, I can't believe John Bolton. Man, it's so satisfying to know John Bolton's going to be in there for the next, term of Trump's
satisfying?
term.
Cool.
Of Trump's term, having to end the wars.
Wow, dude.
Yeah. But it's interesting because if this wasn't just like a brash decision on Trump's part, and it was something that was being thought out, it makes me wonder if this is so that Iran will fill the vacuum, or they want something to happen with Iran.
That's an interesting.
They're trying to egg
angle.
Iran on. I mean, it could be. Trump is saying weird stuff like, let other countries deal with it. Like, let Turkey deal with it. He's not saying anything about Iran at all. But that sends a signal to Iran. It's almost like a cartoonish neoconservative view that maybe they're trying to make the same calculation they did with the Ukrainian Euromaidan protests. If shit gets out of control here, maybe we could bait Putin into doing something stupid. And maybe this is a similar thing. I mean, I don't know.
Right.
I mean, if this isn't Trump's decision, I'm saying if he like actually was talked about this with other people, it could be some kind of power play.
I do not believe that Trump makes any policy decisions on his own. As we know, the kind of haphazard announcement of the Muslim ban and the child separation policy was the doing of Stephen Miller. So even though that seemed really like poorly laid out and caused a giant shit show, that still was a policy being enacted by like the most sinister neo-Nazi elements of his administration. And so I just do not think, I think that there's a Bannon-esque current that is in his ear talking about the isolationism and how he can embolden that aspect of his base while still, like we said, expanding the empire in all of these other regions.
So you don't think that on some level he's intelligent enough to intuit that himself, like that because he was doing this kind of stuff even before Steve Bannon came onto his campaign. Like it seemed like he knew how to.
Yeah, but still, he wouldn't do it by himself. He wouldn't do this by himself.
No, you mean making the decision.
Yeah.
No, you're right about that. But I'm wondering if he just wants to get people in the blob outraged to move the needle, and he knows he can do that by saying, "I'm just going to pull out all the troops. What if I do that?"
And then he can be like, "Why is the media criticizing me for pulling the troops
exactly.
out?"
I feel like I've seen enough of him now to think that he's capable of coming up with all those steps in the decision-making process himself.
Should we move on to Afghanistan and talk about what's going on there?
Yeah.
Afghanistan, longest U.S. war in history, 17 years, going on 17 years, actually going on 18 years now, moving into 2019. That's really scary. Opium production's at all-time high. The Taliban is now in control of more territory than ever before. In fact, when you put a map of the Taliban control of territory over the actual population density, it's stunning because they really do control all of the populated areas. So that really shows you kind of the stalemate that's existed for a long time. But of course, that has not stopped the U.S. from relentlessly bombing Afghanistan. When Obama left office, there were 8,400 U.S. troops in Afghanistan. Now there's 15,300. So the 7,000 troops that Trump is talking about withdrawing, again, are troops that he added. He added those troops to Afghanistan.
I'm surprised that's surprising there was only 8,400 troops in Afghanistan when Obama left office.
Right.
Across that, but just imagine for a second, I don't know where they were concentrated, but that country's huge.
Right.
You know, like what's even the point at that point? It really does beg the question, what is even the ulterior motives for still being there? They're not even really building anything.
Yeah,
the
they're not
pipelines
extracting
aren't being built.
the minerals. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, because if they're pulling out the troops, if they're pulling out even more troops, how are they going to get this mining operation to go through?
I mean, it could just be another Vietnam era hubris thing or arrogance where the U.S. just does not want to admit defeat and just pull out of an 18-year war having nothing.
Could be, yeah.
But I don't know. The most shocking thing about Afghanistan is that, opium, Taliban control, all of that aside, Afghanistan today is suffering the highest number of fatalities from the entire war. No, not when the invasion happened and not when Obama's troop surge happened. Now, under Trump's bombs.
Yeah.
Trump presided over a 52% increase in civilian casualties in just the first 9 months in office, according to the UN AMA. We already talked about the Moab, but yeah, this is the reality in Afghanistan. And at the height of Obama's troop surge, there were 100,000 U.S. troops. So that means, why didn't we praise Obama for ending the Afghanistan war, for pulling all those troops out and just leaving 7,000? Because that's what the number is going to be when Trump pulls out the troops, the same number that Obama left. Why didn't we praise Obama for ending the Afghanistan war?
Yeah, because he was so much of a part of the increase from the Bush administration's war on terror. And I guess maybe because Trump's doing this soon enough into his presidency, he's saying this soon enough to give people who are still holding out hope some kind of bone to grab onto that he's like throwing out to them. But Obama actually pulled back way late in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time everybody lost any faith in him, who thought he was actually going to pull back on empire, by the time he actually started to do little things like not authorize the bill to send offensive weaponry to Ukraine, like nobody cared.
Right.
Like I remember even The Intercept. I mean, all these like anti-imperialist publications, hardly any of them like wrote about that. Obama's just increased so much shit. It was just like that was totally off the radar.
I think that Trump's given so much more of a pass. You said this to me before, because he's not masked in that liberal humanitarian language like Obama was. And so people glommed on to pointing out what a fucking hypocrite Obama was. But for some reason, Trump, it's like, well, of course Trump is, you know, we don't expect anything from him. But for some reason, we're praising any menial thing that he does.
Yeah.
This could mean a couple things. It could mean that we're close to a peace agreement with the Taliban. There's been an impasse for years. And so there's a huge stalemate. And it's been hypothesized for quite a while now that we're very close to a peace agreement. The U.S., of course, wants permanent military installations in Afghanistan, and the Taliban is refusing to allow that to happen. So that's where the negotiations have come to a head. But who knows, maybe it could come in the guise of peacekeeping forces that are more affiliated with NATO. Another option, of course, is increasing bombings and air raids, just like he has been since he took office. And the third option, Trump's close advisor, Eric Prince, that fascist anti-Muslim bigot who was the CEO of Blackwater, he has been in talks with Trump forever about privatizing the war. So that could be exactly what's happening here. We don't know.
If you don't remember, Blackwater actually changed its name to... They went through 2 name changes, didn't they?
Z and Academy.
Academy. So they changed names. They got, huge contracts during the Bush administration for Afghanistan and Iraq. As we were saying earlier, Fallujah, the siege on Fallujah was done as revenge for 4 Blackwater employees getting taken out of their cars and killed in Iraq. But just a few days ago, right after Mattis announced that he's leaving and that Trump floated the idea of withdrawing troops from Afghanistan, withdrawing half the troops, because we should say that he didn't actually announce that. He only announced the Syria thing, I think, specifically.
Okay.
A few days after that happened, Blackwater, the company, actually going back to their original name that they hadn't used for something like 10 years, put out a full-page ad in Recoil magazine, which actually is the January-February issue of the magazine. And it has the company's logo, their old-school logo, Blackwater with the bear paw in the middle of what looks like crosshairs, and just the sentence, "We are coming," in the middle of the ad with an all-black background. So
what a dystopian fucking hellhole we live in. That Blackwater can come back as Blackwater?
With like a threatening ad. And so there was an article running on, actually this is on Military Times. It's not even on, I thought it was on RT, but Military Times wrote an article speculating that this could mean that those talks that you're referring to between Trump and Eric Prince might actually evolve into something real where the Afghanistan war could be partly privatized. So if half the troops leave, you can easily hire 7,000 private citizens working for a company like Blackwater to fill in that hole. And also, those people aren't held accountable to U.S. military rules of engagement. They can't be prosecuted hardly at all. It just sets a really bad precedent. And it's just bizarre as fuck that we already know that's been going on in the background and that this could be actually what will happen. Oh, yeah. And how hilarious is it that he has actually drastically increased since the Obama era? Talk about, everyone's like, oh, well, at least he hasn't started a new war. It's like, well, what do you consider a new war? Obama had done something like 10 airstrikes on Somalia the year before Trump got in office. And then as soon as Trump gets in, Trump does 20 airstrikes the first year he's in office in Somalia. And wasn't he actually doing some kind of like ground operation in Niger too?
Yes.
And then fucking 45 airstrikes this year in Somalia from the Trump administration. That's just crazy.
Yemen, it's the same thing. The ramping up of airstrikes there is mind-blowing. You're talking about Trump expanding the wars, and if we really want to understand how he's expanded the wars and started new wars, it's all with the sanctions. First, before we get into the sanctions, let's get into Iraq, because you can't talk about this alleged war on ISIS in Afghanistan and Syria without understanding that Iraq is a part of it. And on Christmas night, I think Melania and Trump went to Iraq and visited troops for the first time. Is that correct? And that's like a big thing that people are like, oh my God, he was guilted into go visiting the troops. I couldn't give less of a fuck if Trump visits the troops or not. So I think that's a really dumb talking point. But yeah, so he visited the troops in Iraq. He also declared on that visit that he has no plan to withdraw those troops.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just get this out of the way. Under Obama, the number of troops did drop. He came into a full-blown war. Remember, 180,000 soldiers when Bush left office. That's fucking mind-blowing. Obama did slowly drop those troops out, in part due to the resilience of the Iraqi people, you know, from the Iraq war cables, from Chelsea Manning, the Blackwater, the Nasser massacre. All of these things compounded really did force the withdrawal. So Obama withdrew, left 5,000 troops through the last couple of years of his administration. So by this logic, like you said, we should have paraded Obama around as ending the U.S. empire's war in the Middle East.
Yeah, or the folding back U.S. empire. It's just so weird to be in this position now to actually feel like we have to set the record straight, because it's like we spent literally 8 years straight almost. I mean, we weren't doing the podcast from the very beginning of the Obama administration. We did this in like 2010. We were against Obama's foreign policy. All we did was criticize how he's falling short of every promise he made. Mm-hmm. This is not good enough. He's still leaving troops in Iraq, so it's not a real withdrawal. Yeah. I mean, we never gave him any credit for anything except for like his last year of his administration, where he didn't actually overthrow Assad, pulled back from the red line or whatever, and then didn't send weapons to Ukraine. That's it. That's like all we praised him for. We literally didn't give him an inch with anything else. So it's insane to have to sit here and be like, actually, you're being way too kind to Trump and giving like all these free passes to him, because by that same logic, you would have to praise Obama, which we never did. But people might be like, well, why are you defending Obama? It's like, no, we're not. We're just trying to explain to you how ridiculous it is to praise Trump.
Right. And
it doesn't make sense.
What's even weirder, Robbie, is that Trump basically did start a new war in Iraq. Obama did kick up the number of troops at the very tail end of his administration, quote unquote, to fight ISIS, right after the Libya fucking disaster. But guess what Trump did? He came in and nearly doubled the amount of troops in Iraq.
Jesus Christ.
And not only that, Robbie, he bombed the shit out of Iraq, just like he did all these other countries. In one single series of U.S. airstrikes in 2017, over 500 civilians were killed at once. It was known as the Mosul Massacre, the single largest death toll inflicted since the war began in 2003. I don't even remember hearing about that.
Wow. I guess the media was too busy just talking about how Trump was in bed with Putin.
That blood is on Trump's hands. 500 people in one series of airstrikes.
That's fucking nuts. Do we even know how many people were even killed in the Moab?
No.
We don't even have a death count of that.
No,
so the biggest bomb used short of a nuclear weapon ever in the history of warfare. This wasn't just him dropping it in a field to show off. He dropped it on apparent enemy territory. We don't even know how many people. I mean, that's insane.
Well, the population of the area was 15,000 people.
Holy shit.
I remember posting that because I looked it up immediately. I looked up how many people live in this province that he just dropped this bomb, and it had a population of 15,000. And I wrote that. People were like, you fucking idiot. That bomb didn't kill 15,000 people. I was like, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying this was a populated area. And these were not just ISIS caves. And the problem is that they were blocked. Journalists were blocked. Government officials were blocked. And like aid workers were blocked from the area after the strike. So we have no idea what happened there. But it's really hard to assess the reality. It is. That's why people are like falling prey and susceptible to so many bad things.
Is Trump a good persuader? Like, is he able to make people just believe? think?
I think it's still the treatment from the media, and just like the Mattis thing, it made him seem like he really was standing up to the generals. It's like, have we forgotten that he picked these generals?
Well, yeah, that's what's
It's not like he just like got handpicked by like the deep state and then he's turning against them. He literally handpicked all of the people who are around him. And when you look at who he actually picked, that shit gets real dark, dude. You forget how crazy the people Trump picked are. Mike Pompeo, he's a psychopath. He believes in the apocalypse. He was at some think tank saying all of politics is a struggle for the rapture. That's what Pompeo fucking thinks. He put this guy in charge of the CIA? This guy, he's a Koch brother puppet. His entire political career has been curated by the Koch brothers. He's revolting. He runs a defense contractor corporation, Mike Pompeo. So this is this guy. He's also advocated the execution of Julian Assange, Edward Snowden. Like, this guy was in charge of the CIA. That's just Mike Pompeo. Look at John Bolton. Look at Nikki Haley, this woman who essentially was working for Israel. Like, what message was that sending to Israel by handpicking Nikki Haley to be the ambassador? It's nuts. So yeah, we forget who Trump picked. And we like to think that Trump's standing up to someone because the people he handpicked to surround him are now fighting with him. It's so weird.
I can't stress this enough that just because the people that you hate, like Bill Kristol and Hillary Clinton and all these like DC, neoliberal people are railing against Trump for mostly the wrong reasons, doesn't mean you can ignore the people that Trump has picked. Like, that doesn't mean that Trump is good. Or that he has like this counterweight to the actual, what really is the deep state apparatus in this country. I mean, just the military industrial complex alone. Obviously, he's not a counterweight to that.
Right.
Unless you think that just pulling out the ground troops, the very small, frankly, and I hate to downplay troops being in another country, but compared to before, it's not that many troops he's pulling back. So to say that that's him doing a counterweight to the military industrial complex would not be accurate at all. Everything else he's done is like completely encourage him. The Boeing guy being used to temporarily replace Mattis. And then on top of that, there's already been a lot of talk in the media. This seems like it's being leaked from the Trump administration that they want to hire Jack Keane to replace Mattis. And Jack Keane, in case you don't know who he is he's a regular on Fox News. He's a talking head. I think he's an ex-general that appears on there all the time. He's the chairman for the Institute for the Study of War, an entirely defense contractor funded think tank ran by the Kagan family. Jack Keane actually co-wrote the Iraq Surge paper with Fred Kagan that ended up actually becoming adopted by the Bush administration for the surge. So, Elliot Abrams was also floated for Secretary of State.
So classic anti-deep state guy. Classic. Okay, so Trump is a revolting, disgusting, imperialist monster who gleefully talked about authorizing things worse than waterboarding, torturing suspected terrorists' families, carpet bombing neighborhoods, lifting the rules of engagement, expanding the military to its biggest size ever, which he did. He authorized a near $1 trillion defense budget, $500 million of which is going to deter Russian aggression in the Baltics. $700 million more going to Israeli air defense. More weapon, $500 million also to Ukraine.
Well, it's so
on top
bizarre.
Of that,
because how is Bill Kristol
just
sitting there acting like Trump is the biggest? It's like
so
new
weird.
These are all things that he loves.
That they like. I know.
This is like shit that they dreamt about.
I know,
and they jerked off to.
Yeah, and then he also created. Let's not forget, he created another branch of the military. He created the Space Force, which is another PNAC wet dream. He created that shit, man. And again, surrounded himself with the most grotesque cabinet of warmongering neocons and bloodthirsty war criminals. How can you discount that?
I know.
How can you discount the fact that he's still growing the military to its biggest size? Mm-hmm. He said the military was small.
Yeah.
He said he wanted in true authoritarian fashion to see some fucking military parade and spend like millions of dollars just showing a sheer show of force. Like, again, what we project on DPRK, he wanted to do that shit here.
That's why I think we're stuck in this weird paradigm. And it's not a weird paradigm. I can understand it. Sending in ground troops anywhere is horrifying. Is like the worst, has so many bad implications. And it seems like that's the worst thing you can do. But when you look at empire and look at the history of it, you know all the other things that it does too to sort of extend its reach. And it's not just sending in ground troops. I mean, that is one terrible, horrific aspect of it, a military occupation. But there are other forms of military occupation. Not respecting the sovereignty of a country's airspace and just constantly flying drones over it, that is a form of military occupation. There's just no human soldiers on the ground. Like, or
you're committing terrorism. You're terrorizing civilians.
Yeah, and I just don't understand why people can't see. I mean, just expanding the military in and of itself to the highest level it's ever been, the amount of money in it, the budget. That is not pulling back from even the edges of U.S. empire.
Oh, and I haven't even gotten to the arms deals that he's doing, record-breaking arms deals to all of these countries. He immediately lifted all of the Obama-era restrictions on, like, Bahrain to just sell them billions of dollars worth of armaments. My biggest question about Syria, will the U.S. bases remain? I think that the answer is going to be yes. Yeah, it's crazy, Robbie. It's really crazy. And we can't forget that Trump has escalated and ramped up sanctions to a point that is totally unprecedented. So I was looking at Enigma Labs. They track sanctions from the U.S. Obama did administer sanctions, hundreds of them, especially when it comes to Russia and Ukraine. He did administer hundreds of sanctions. Trump has escalated sanctions on nearly every single area that Trump did. So let's start with Iran. Trump upended, of course, the historic nuclear deal and slapped 143 sanctions that have since completely debilitated the entire country. People cannot get life-saving medication. These are the effects of sanctions. They are absolutely an act of war. It's outrageous to say that they're not an act of war. The empire uses sanctions because it drives the global economy. You have to trade oil in U.S. dollars. Like, that's why the U.S. can throw around its economic weight. But it's just shocking when you see the amount of leverage used economically under Trump. North Korea slapped 80 sanctions on top of the 74 applied by Obama. So keep that in mind. 2 years in, and he's already done more than Obama about North Korea. Allegedly, this peace president who wants peace between North and South Korea. That's weird. Why is he slapping 80 sanctions on them?
Yeah. Well, this is his 4D chess, I guess. This is how he makes deals, people will say.
Oh, check this out. In Syria, 287 sanctions. That's double the amount that Obama slapped on Syria. Why is that?
Wow.
Almost 300 sanctions on Syria. That's going to be a hard recovery.
Jesus
Pick up
Christ.
the country. Libya, 43 sanctions. Russia and Ukraine, he's kind of defied that notion of a Putin puppet by adding 105 sanctions on top of Obama's. 4, annexing Crimea, alleged meddling in the election, and the attempted poisoning of Skripal. Isn't that bizarre?
Oh, I forgot the Skripal thing. And what's funny is he's never actually said anything about the Skripal thing. It seemed like people really wanted him to say something. He never budged on saying something. So it's interesting that he did something so drastic, but never said anything. What's that about?
I mean, it's just more behind the scenes maneuvering to get these countries to bend to our will.
But do you think...
without it being like in the news.
So you think he knows that it'll be in the news if he says it, and then he doesn't want it to make news? Like,
That's
you think he's intentionally
too.
trying not to make news with doing just that specifically?
Yeah, he's not going to go out there and announce all these sanctions on all these countries. But oddly enough,
but the
Robbie,
Iran stuff, he was, certain ones
and Venezuela
he did.
too.
Yeah,
but the ones that are like pleasing the blob, he's not. So he's kind of playing both sides again, talking out of both sides of his mouth.
So the ones that please the blob, he's not saying it out loud to please the blob. Mm-hmm. So who does it please?
I mean, it's rare to have presidents like announce all of these sanctions.
No,
we're talking about like hundreds of sanctions.
No, but I guess the Skripal's thing, let's not just say that, okay, I guess going back just the idea that he never said anything about it at all. Even when like Theresa May and Macron were saying that the reason we're bombing Assad now is because of the Skripal's thing. Like they mentioned that. So like he never mentioned it at all, and it seemed like there's just all this building pressure. So I'm just wondering. But you're right. I mean, you're right. Most presidents don't announce sanctions.
Whatever their form, they are war. They do not hurt the intended government, like the U.S. likes to claim. They instead hurt the most poor and vulnerable sectors of society. They punish the poorest people. Yeah. They prevent crucial access to food, medicine, and other imported goods, or other things that are have to do with the U.S. economy and the global economy. Let's just go to Latin America because this is, Trump hasn't started any new wars. Oh, really? Because amazingly, I was all fucking critical of Obama for adding those 7 sanctions on Venezuela. All of a sudden in 2015, Obama announced Venezuela as a unique national security threat.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, that's so bizarre. Why are we focusing on Venezuela again? Oddly enough, Bush didn't slap any sanctions during his term against Chavez, even though he hated him.
Wow, dude.
Yeah.
That's
0.
crazy.
Yeah, so Obama gets in and adds 7 randomly.
Yeah.
Trump has absolutely set his sights on destroying Latin America. This troika of tyranny speech by John Bolton, that was an announcement of sanctions against Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela. And Venezuela has been slapped with 63 sanctions because Trump has a laser focus on overthrowing Maduro.
Yeah.
63 fucking sanctions. I mean, this is totally undermining any chance of economic recovery.
Yeah.
And then they'll point further to Venezuela's inability to recover and be like, see, that's socialism. With Venezuela, the generals were holding back Trump. If it weren't for the generals surrounding Trump, we would already have been invading Venezuela because Trump wanted to invade Venezuela. And he's on record saying, when can we go in? When can we go in? So yeah, Trump has started new wars all over Latin America. The sanctions are wars. So the sanctions alone really crystallized what Trump is doing behind the scenes, especially with this deal making that he likes to boast. Well, this is the deals. These are the deals that Trump's making. Crushing all of the countries that don't bow down to the U.S. empire and apparently just forcing them to capitulate to whatever our demands are. So that's what's going on behind the scenes. And I was stunned at the number of sanctions and the fact that no one's really talking about this. So again, all of this that we went over is a preview to an Empire Files series that you guys should really check out. Go to the Empire Files on YouTube and subscribe. And if you're already doing that, please go to Media Roots, Abby Media Roots YouTube channel and subscribe because we upload segments from this podcast on our YouTube channel. And it's fun. We just kind of upload random segments. If you don't have time to listen to the entire podcast, you can go on and listen to segments. But anyway, please subscribe to both of those channels because coming up on Empire Files, we're releasing an entire series on every region of the world and explaining what Trump is doing. And it will absolutely stun you. Like Robbie said, we're not downplaying the notion of how important it is to withdraw troops. Like, obviously, that's a no-brainer. Of course, all troops should be removed. We just really want to be careful without, we really want to be careful about not conflating the idea of removing troops with ending the U.S. empire's wars.
Yeah. Yeah. Or acting like that's, with all these other things in place, you got to look at the whole totality of it. Because a lot of the things we've been saying, not just some of the things about sanctions, which are things I didn't even know about, but a lot of things we're saying are obvious. So just look at the facts. Look at his actions. His rhetoric cannot be trusted.
Whenever there's some U.S. maneuvering in terms of militarism, usually means that there's buildup and focus elsewhere, and a strategy in place. Looking at the sanctions, looking at Latin America, it's pretty obvious that, the same kind of gaggle of neocon criminals who destroyed and eviscerated the Middle East with the axis of evil are now wanting to do the same thing to Latin America. Because John Bolton has been there this whole time.
And we could spend, an hour talking about what he's been doing with Iran, the saber rattling, the Iran team at the State Department. All the signs are really troubling. And I'm just astonished that people are celebrating this who should know better.
Absolutely. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Just trying to sort through the madness. It's very important to provide context and nuance and a little bit of geopolitical perspective here. Thanks so much, everyone. Really hope you guys have a great new year, and hopefully next year we're on a better trajectory.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Please consider donating to Media Roots Radio via Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/Media Roots Radio, you can donate to us as little as $1 per episode we release. So thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Have a great new year.
Happy holidays.